If you're just only coding, it's great. You got all these projects out and you're learning more, but nobody knows you did all this. You can't expect people to find it out without you telling them. So the best person to advocate for you is you.
That was Rizel Scarlett, a staff developer advocate at TBD. Hi, and welcome to the Scrimba podcast. We hope you're enjoying your summer. Today, we're bringing back one of our favorite interviews we did last year. Rizel is a career changer, software engineer, and community builder. She dropped out of psychology studies after running out of money. Then she went into IT support, then into coding, and then realized that after working in an organization that teaches women and non-binary people of color to code, developer advocacy could be a great career for her. In this episode, you'll hear how Rizel learned to code, paved her own path, and knew when she needed to pivot. You'll learn why internships are cool, and what to be on the lookout for if you're looking for your first opportunity. Rizel will also teach you why you need personal branding and how to do it even if you're an introvert. Complete with step-by-step instructions on how to write a blog post, practice public speaking, and network. Yeah, I think even now it's probably super clear why we really love this interview. We originally aired it in March of 2023. At that time, Rizel was working at GitHub, but her advice still stands. You're listening to the Scrimba podcast. Let's get into it.
It definitely wasn't something I wanted to do. I didn't really understand truly what coding was, and I didn't have other people in my life who were really in tech. What happened and how I got into tech initially is that I was studying psychology in undergrad, and then I realized I don't have enough money to continue to the next semester, so I ended up having to drop out. And that made me realize, okay, if I don't have money to continue to the next semester, maybe I won't really have enough for the next following years. And usually with a psychology degree, you need to get a graduate degree to essentially start making money and actually have a career as a therapist or a psychologist. So I decided to go back to the drawing board and figure out what careers would I would still be able to make a living without having to go through years and years of school. Tech kept popping up, so I decided to try that out. At first, I was a little nervous on the computer science front because I didn't have a strong math background. So I went for IT instead and became an IT support person. But after a few months and years of working in that, I wanted to challenge myself more. And I attended a coding bootcamp and became a software engineer.
It feels like quite a leap from sort of psychology to computing. What played into that decision at the time?
I'll be honest and say maybe the money. That was really survival mode. And I was like, you know what? I've used the computer before. I should be able to figure this out.
Was it as easy as you might have hoped?
The transition into IT support was not too bad because it was really just me troubleshooting. A lot of times I was working with older employees who maybe never really were comfortable with their computer. So that part wasn't too hard. But the transition into software engineering was a little bit harder than I expected, but I liked it. I think I liked the challenge of thinking and realizing I actually do have a more logically minded brain, and I just never paid attention to it before.
I was checking out your LinkedIn, by the way, and the only thing that struck me right away is how small my scroll bar got on the right hand side because your work experience is so long. It seems like you've done quite a few different types of roles around the IT support and later on development. I think before it said you're a front desk associate at Planet Fitness. That's pretty cool. But yeah, can you talk us through that a little bit, the story there?
I think one of the reasons I probably had so many jobs is because I was excited to have a job. I don't know if that makes any sense. When my parents brought me to America, I came here undocumented and they didn't know it would negatively impact my life as much. So for a lot of my life, I couldn't have a job and do other things that adults in America could do. So as soon as I got the opportunity to be able to work, I did so many jobs. So I started off as a site director and a coach at this organization called Let's Get Ready. And they teach people SAT prep. Then I went into Planet Fitness as a front desk associate. On the side, I was in order for me to be able to fund my learning for IT support, I wanted to get a higher paying job. So I became a phlebotomist while I was working at Planet Fitness. That's how I got that phlebotomy job. Once I finished out like my courses with IT support, that's when I transitioned into IT support. And then after that is when I transitioned into software engineering, if that helps paint the picture more.
Yeah, no, but the reason I ask, I think, is because so many people learning to code, it's easy to see that person coming out of school thinking you're already behind as someone changing career, or like you had to make the perfect decision. But I think for so many people, and you're a perfect illustration of this, there's nothing wrong with trying out a bunch of different jobs, seeing what resonates, and, course correcting a little bit. There'll be some things you like about one job or one role within tech. And from there, you can improve your path, right? Instead of trying to design this perfect path without all the information up front.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of times, especially when you graduate high school, they're like, pick the career that you want for your rest of your life. You don't need to do that. You can try out a career, take your transferable skills from that career and try out another one.
Without school or anything, how did you go about teaching yourself computing and coding?
I tried self-teaching at first, which was great. Like I did free code camp and the things that were available to me in 2018. But after that, I decided to go to a coding boot camp because for me, just how I am, I like more of a structure or some accountability. Somebody being like, if you don't do this, you're going to get in trouble. So that's where I learned computing. And then I continued to learn more because after I got a job, I enrolled in college. So I did have some formal training.
It's cool you went to a boot camp. I mean, it's really interesting as well that you could identify about yourself the ways you like to learn. There are always challenges, right? Whether you go the boot camp, university, or self-taught route, they're just a bit different. What did you enjoy the most about the bootcamp apart from the accountability?
I think I enjoyed that I didn't have to figure out what I needed to learn. I think I struggled with that a little bit when I tried to learn on my own. I just wasn't sure, should I start with Python or HTML? Where do I go next? And I think I enjoyed the camaraderie of other people within the boot camp. I went to a free boot camp called Resilient Coders that was mainly for people of color. So I liked starting off my software engineering career with people of color.
Can you talk more about that community and camaraderie part of learning to code?
I think a lot of times people think coding is this lonesome, isolated job. And there are times when we're working alone. But it's great to be able to work with people and be able to be oh, can I bounce an idea off of you or whatever? And to hear from other people's experiences that oh, I'm struggling and having a hard time with this as well. I think that was really helpful for me to have other people be oh man, this is hard to learn. That way I wasn't thinking that I'm the only one not picking up the information.
Was it a tough decision to go to a boot camp? You mentioned that this one was free essentially. That's pretty special.
It was still tough though. Well, okay. Actually, I'm a little bit more impulsive. So as soon as I heard about it, I was ready to just join it.
Decisive, not impulsive.
Okay, I like that word better. Decisive. Yeah, I was ready to join it. I was you know what? I'm ready to learn more. I had the privilege of still living with my parents at the time. So it wasn't I wouldn't be able to afford rent or something like that. But I told my boyfriend at the time, who's not my husband, that I was going to join it and I wanted him to join it with me. And he was wait, hold on. But how would you have money for other things? Because it's free, but that doesn't mean you'll still have an income coming in. So he suggested that we still both do it. But how about we save 6 months worth of money first and then join the boot camp? So I think that made it easier for me. But besides that, it wasn't a hard choice. I was ready.
So your husband is a developer as well?
Yeah, he is.
And you both learned at the boot camp for the first time pretty much? Or I guess you did some free code camp and stuff at first.
Yeah, we both learned at the same boot camp. Yeah, I did the free code camp stuff a little bit before him. But yeah, it was great to have him in there. But it also, we had a lot of arguments.
What do you mean? Semicolons or no semicolons, tabs or spaces, GIF or GIF?
I think now we learn to appreciate it, but there are areas of parts of web development that he's amazing at and I'm not good at, and then vice versa. So sometimes I would come in with an idea that just didn't really make sense and he'd be no, and I'd be no, my idea makes sense. We're going to do it. So yeah, I'm a little bit stubborn.
Oh, that is so cool. And did the coding come easily to you? You had this background with computing, working in IT and support and things, but again, programming is this sort of specific way of logical thinking is so new to so many people.
There were parts that I was able to pick up well from being in IT, but then there were parts that weren't that great. I think I picked up how to use the terminal and command line a little bit faster than maybe other people in the boot camp, because I was like, I've used this before. Or like I've heard of the term APIs before. So I was like, okay, I kind of get what it does. But the part that, like what you said with the logical thinking, had a really hard time figuring out, how do I write these functions or steps telling the computer what to do? And like my bootcamp teacher kept saying, like, you got to break it down by little by little. But I struggled to understand that at first.
I think that whole thinking like a programmer part is difficult for most people, but it comes with practice, right? And there are some tools. And I think the one you mentioned from your teacher, breaking things down into smaller units, is a great tool. Just takes a bit of time to learn them and then you can be on your way. And with that in mind, I'm wondering how you went on after the boot camp. How did you go about finding your first developer opportunities?
I was very excited to do that. So I did a couple IT internships, like we said, and IT jobs. I tried to see if I could stay connected with those companies and see if I can be able to return as maybe a software engineering intern. So I had interviews with those people, or maybe even recruiters that maybe moved from one company to another. So after my coding boot camp, I landed an internship at a company called Form Labs.
Why internships over junior developer roles?
I started off with internships first, because I was used to them from IT and I liked the experience of being able to try out, is this company a right suit for me? And am I a right suit for them? And then also be able to figure out, how do software engineering teams work without me having the pressure of, this project is going to sink or swim the whole company. In an internship, they give you toy projects sometimes and they might throw it away. I kind of was nervous of what would it be like to work on a software engineering team? I was nervous of failing. And I was like, let me just go in softly. And then if I do a good job, they can transition me from intern to full time. And then I know a lot of times people want to leave their boot camp and then make as much money as possible. I had the privilege of at the time I still lived with my parents. So I was like, I'm okay if I make a little bit less money to be able to build my confidence and my knowledge of how software engineering teams work without putting too much pressure on myself.
And those connections you had from the previous IT internships you did they help at all with these first opportunities?
Yeah, I think they definitely did. One recruiter that I worked with at one of my IT internships ended up moving to a different company, and I messaged her, and then I was able to get an interview.
Yeah, I think that's so underrated. Just, every person you pass, even if they're in a different industry, perhaps, there might be some opportunity to help each other out in the future. I was also interviewing someone a few weeks ago where she was just talking to her friend about development, and then her friend recommended this company that she'd heard of. I think just kind of vocalizing what you're working on and what you're looking for is a great way to attract those kind of opportunities.
That's so true. If you just start telling people your goals, someone might probably help you move to the next goal. They'll be like, oh, I know exactly what to do. I love that.
How long did the internships last, and did it go as you planned? Did you get given more responsibility in the same company, or maybe you parlayed that experience to get another role as a junior or mid-level or whatever it happened to be at the time?
The first internship experience didn't go as well. It was really weird. I wasn't on a team with other software engineers. I was on the business systems analyst team, and I was the only software engineer. They wanted me to build out a web app. So that didn't go as well because I don't think I got the mentorship I needed. But then I did another internship, which I know sounds crazy, but I did. And at that company, I was able to go from intern to junior developer. They had a lot more software engineers. They had mentorship, and they had a better plan for how I would move from intern to full time.
I suppose with the benefit of hindsight, if you went back to that time, you'd probably know the signs to look for, right? What would make a great team or a great employer. Can you maybe share that hindsight with us today? Say someone's looking for a new job. What are some of the things you recommend they look for to make sure that they are joining a supportive company and team that can help them grow?
Yeah, that's a good question. One, are there varying levels in the team? I think it's a little bit scary to join a team of all junior developers, which is rare, but it sometimes happens. If they're all new to coding. And then if there's mostly senior developers, I guess that's not too bad. But I think having varying levels helps because one, you have the other junior developers like you where you can relate to them and have that camaraderie. And then two, if you have more mid-level or senior developers, they'd be able to come and help you out, give you better mentorship, give you better code reviewing. That's great. Also, how do they react to when people make mistakes? Are they more on the blame culture, or is it like more of a blameless culture? Because that can really affect your confidence as a software engineer. Because a lot of times it's not your fault if you mess up. It's just there was not guardrails in place for someone at your level. I would look for like those two things.
That's a sort of petrifying situation to be in where you're scared to fail as a junior, because that's kind of how growth happens, right? When you fail and you learn and then you don't make the same mistake. There should probably be processes in place to make sure that when you fail, it's not catastrophic. You hopefully don't bring down production or send a mass email to the entire customer. What was that company? There was a company recently that sent out like a test email to millions and millions of users. And there's a bunch of tweets like, oh, this junior is in trouble.
I think it was HBO. I have a talk where I literally talk about like setting juniors up for success. And I'm like, this was an example of not doing that. It's not their fault. There were enough guardrails in place.
That's perfect. We'll have to link that in the show notes then.
Coming up, how to brand yourself and why you should take your time.
Oh, I learned to code in like 2 months and now I'm making $500K.
But first, I have a small favor to ask for. If you're enjoying the show, and if you're learning from it, and if you want to support us so we get to make more of it, could you share it with someone? Word of mouth is the best way to support a podcast that you like. You could share your key takeaways from this episode on Twitter or on LinkedIn. You could also share it with someone on Discord, or even do that in person. You give us social proof, and we give you many more interesting and insightful interviews just like this one. If you're feeling super supportive, you can also leave us a rating or a review in your podcast app of choice. And as long as your LinkedIn or Twitter posts contain the words Scrimba and podcast, we will find them and you might get a shout out right here on the show. Thank you in advance. And now, let's go back to the interview with Rizel.
When you're a junior, it can feel a bit like every company is doing you a favor, maybe, by recognizing your potential and investing in you. And that can be true to some extent, right? I think it's fine to be grateful, but you also have to recognize that as a junior, you bring a lot to the table as well. What's your experience been working as a junior?
I think I did start off thinking that like, oh my gosh, these people are so nice for just hiring me. Like, I have no clue what I'm doing. And like, they took a chance on me. But looking back, I don't think I should have thought that way because I did bring a lot of value to different teams. I feel like I helped us to think about different user experiences differently. I know that I always bring like an eagerness and excitedness to complete work. Sometimes, you know, people might not be like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. But I always like have been a person that like raised my hand and been excited. I'm like, oh, I want to learn about this. So I think I've always brought that personality of being eager. And I think other people, if they are junior and they just reflect on themselves and who they are, they're probably bringing some really valuable insight to their team or helping to improve the team culture, and they don't even realize it.
How did you get hired as a junior developer advocate at GitHub? What's the story there?
Yeah, so I was working as a software engineer, and I was also helping to run a nonprofit. Like, it was like very grassroots. It was just the three of us running it. And this nonprofit was like teaching women of color how to code and non-binary people of color how to code. And it was just like basics of like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And then we encouraged them to go to other coding boot camps, or we created partnerships with other coding boot camps so they can learn more. And through that, I realized I really enjoy like building out demos, teaching people, creating slide decks, empowering people. And I was like, oh, I wish I could do this like for the rest of my life. But this nonprofit doesn't pay the same money as a software engineer. But then I started to realize there's this thing called developer advocates, and people are doing it. Like, I'm like, wait a minute. People are doing like talks and teaching people and getting to experiment. And I'm like, oh, I want to do that. So I continued to like stay connected in the Twitter community or the Twitter developer community. And I was like really just, I don't know a better word for this. I guess looking at people's LinkedIns to just understand like how they got from point one to point B. And one day I saw that GitHub was hiring a junior developer advocate. And I was like, this is so perfect, because I had been interviewing for like regular, not junior roles in developer advocacy. And people were like, I think you have like some of the fundamental skills, but you're a little too junior. So I was like, this one is great because this job description says willing to learn. And I'm like, that's me. I'm willing to learn.
How long have you been there for so far?
Oh man, maybe a year and 5 months.
Yeah, so in a matter of like a year or so, you've presented at GitHub Universe during the keynote, which is so epic, by the way, Rizel. That's so cool. Published so many posts on Dev2 that get lots of attention, hearts, favorites, comments, all that good stuff. Streaming, other public speaking, Twitter Spaces and all these things, obviously delivering a lot of value. It's really cool.
Thank you. And I think I will say what made me even more productive and be able to make an impact was my team and my manager being able to understand like how they can best support me and allow me to grow. When I joined GitHub, my manager at the time, who was Brian Douglas, he would meet with me twice a week. He would talk to me about like different strategies he uses to succeed, like that sometimes he would attend product meetings, even if we weren't necessarily invited, or he would rewatch the recordings to figure out like, what does GitHub really want to push forward? So he could figure out like what he should prioritize in terms of like advocacy and awareness. And he just looked for different ways to insert himself. And I think him giving me that advice and then also putting me at the forefront of like, if someone said, oh, we need someone to do this, he'll be like, let's try Rizel. Like, let's have Rizel do that. And I think that helped me a lot more. And like, he would still support me. He wouldn't put me in something that like I was like completely going to fail at. He would like give me the tools to succeed, and then I would be able to execute from there.
I like that a lot because even though clearly you were perfectly capable, as you took the opportunities created by Brian in that case and ran with them as a junior in a new company, you might not have raised your hand and be like, yeah, I think I can do that. But having your manager sort of advocate for you in that way is really, really powerful. It's hard to get a sort of take of where your open source contributions and writing and Twitter and things like that, where they were before you got the job at GitHub. Was personal branding, which could be writing, public speaking, having a portfolio or whatever, were these things you were conscious of during your job searches before you got this role at GitHub, or are they things that kind of snowballed a bit later?
I think they snowballed a bit later. I didn't really have that presence. I think I knew you had to, but I didn't really know how. Like I would tweet. I've always been someone that used Twitter a lot. Like even when I was in college or in boot camp, I'll be like, oh, I got to learn this today. It was super interesting. Like I would tweet that out. And I guess now looking back, that's quote unquote learning in public, but I didn't realize that.
You kind of invented it without knowing it had been invented already.
Right.
Six beat you to it.
He did. Yeah, it was like 2 years too late. Besides that, I think what I had used in like my quote unquote portfolio was like my slides that I made at the nonprofit I worked at, or like maybe I sent in some recordings of me teaching, but I really didn't have this like long history of like me creating content.
Do you think that learning in public and having a personal brand is a good thing to focus on as a junior developer? Or would you instead suggest people focus on, just becoming the best coder and interviewee they can be?
While it may seem overwhelming, I think both are of almost equal importance. I think a lot of times we do see people who don't have those coding skills and they're on Twitter being like 10 ways to become a developer in 10 days and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is kind of clear that you might not really understand software engineering and you're just trying to create content to gain more of a public presence. But I think the balance is important. If you're just only coding, it's great, right? Like you got all these projects out and you're learning more, but nobody knows that you did all this. You can't expect people to find it out without you telling them. So the best person to advocate for you is you. So like you kind of have to put it out there, even though it feels like a little cringy sometimes. And then people will start recognizing like, oh, Alex is really smart at this. Maybe we should hire him, or maybe we should bring him on a podcast or something like that. Getting your name out about like the work that you're doing is just as important as actually doing the work, in my opinion.
Hopefully someone clips that and goes viral. Thank you for using my name in your example. With the remainder of our time, I thought it'd be really interesting to talk a little bit about some ways people can learn in public. I'll kind of throw categories at you and we'll take it in a certain direction. Maybe the first one that's a really good one to start with is public speaking. This could be all kinds of things, right? It could be giving a lightning talk at a meetup. It could be submitting a CFP at a conference. maybe you won't be talking at like NDC or GitHub Universe or something as a brand new developer, but there are some like conferences like Codeland, I think it's called, with Forum and Dev2, which is specifically for beginners. So there are opportunities there. Maybe YouTube videos could count for something like this as well. Just putting your face and your voice in front of an audience, whether it's async or not. But the question people always run into quite quickly is like, do I have anything to talk about? And then it's like, oh, I don't feel very confident doing this. Like it's really out of your comfort zone. Is it something that's always come naturally to you? And in any case, what advice could you offer to people looking to get involved?
First of all, I still am a pretty shy person. I actually was surprised that I could even do GitHub Universe, because when I do public speaking, my voice is usually like shaky. Like even as a kid, like I would talk and I'd be like, hello. So I understand if people feel nervous. And then in terms of like not knowing what to talk about, I think an easy one is like your journey and how you got in there. And then also, I think a lot of times people give themselves this barrier of, oh, people have talked about this before, or everybody already knows about this. It's not really true. Like there's somebody out there that doesn't know about HTML or doesn't know about CSS or whatever. Like even if you think it's basic, there's somebody that doesn't know it and would love to hear it in the way that you're going to explain it. That's how I always try to think of it. And I would say a low barrier to like trying to do a talk, kind of like what you said with a YouTube video, is like there are virtual conferences and virtual meetups out there, especially since the pandemic happened. That was really, really helpful to me to just hop on a Zoom and do a talk, because I couldn't really see anybody's faces. I was just looking at my slide deck, and yeah, that was helpful for me.
And by the way, they would love to have more volunteers, I think. They probably can't get enough, so you might be surprised at the reception.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, the next kind of category, and I think there's a little bit of overlap here, but we have to talk about it. It's writing. Could be a Dev2 post, could be your own blog, could even be like writing for your portfolio, doing a sort of a write-up of one of your projects, for example. I've read a bunch of your Dev2 posts. In fact, a lot of them before our interview in recent months just, popped up on the feed because they were doing really well on the platform. And I think you write so wonderfully. You seem to have so much to write about. Like, I actually don't know how you do it. Like the posts are like, done, so long, but at the same time, it feels like you're not using any more words than you need to. What's your process for creating a really awesome Dev2 post?
I don't even know if I ever thought of my process. I've always liked writing because I feel like I express myself better through writing than speaking. Usually, if I learn something new, I'll like write it down on a list of like, oh, this would be cool to write about because I just learned about this. And sometimes I'm not necessarily thinking like this has to be for other people. Sometimes I write for me. Like I'm like, oh, I need to remind myself of like how to do this technical thing. Or if it's on a soft skill thing, like I'm like, maybe I'll just remind myself that I'm not like for the moments that I have imposter syndrome or I'm feeling down, that I'm not that bad as I'm thinking. That's the one thing. And then as a developer advocate, I think it's easier for me to think of all of these things to do because sometimes I'll be like listening to people of like what we want to promote. Like we want to promote Copilot more, or code spaces. So then I'll be like, oh, what's this really cool thing I could do with it? And I'll like write that down and save it for later. In terms of like writing, after I got like all these random ideas, I'll choose one and I'll create an outline and the person that I'm writing to, or like the type of person. So if it's me as a beginner, if it's me as an expert, that way, you said I write too much. I would write even more if I was trying to write for every single user.
Hey, not too much, just enough, okay?
Well, it would be too much if I tried to write for every single user. So like if I'm going to write how to use Copilot, I don't need to write for the expert and the beginner and the intermediate. I'll write like one blog post for the beginner. I'll write out the outline and then I'll fill in the outline with like paragraphs. So I guess that's my process.
I see this mistake all the time, and it's probably something I struggled with a little bit as well. Say you're writing about a quite advanced topic and you use an arrow function, and then you start going off on this tangent to describe arrow functions. And then what happens is the post isn't good for beginners because you're teaching an advanced subject, and it's not good for advanced developers because now you're boring them with stuff they already know. Like if you can nail the outline, I reckon a lot of the actual body of the post is going to come more easily.
I agree. And I still struggle with it today. The other day I wrote a draft blog post and I was like, oh, I'm writing about dev containers. I got to explain what a dev container is. Then I got to do, I'm like, I don't need to do all that. I need to keep it simple. And then maybe in a following blog post, I'll write more about that.
And by the way, one of the reasons this is such an important subject to talk about, apart from writing blog posts, is that when you write, what you're trying to do is capture someone's attention and convince them of something or keep them interested to teach them something that's a bit difficult. And this is the exact same thing that applies to your cover letter, to your portfolio, to your LinkedIn, to your correspondence with companies when you're talking to them. I'm just wondering, do you sit down, write, and it's done? Or I guess I'm telling you my experience here a little bit. Like, I have to kind of write a bad first draft before I can, refine it a little bit and even sleep on it sometimes to get it right.
Sometimes I'll kind of like write out the idea in my mind, but I won't be able to write it out on paper yet. And then like if I take a shower or something like that, the thoughts will start coming in and I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll go to my laptop, type out a little bit. Sometimes I get a little too laser focused and I'll just finish the draft and press publish. But other times I'll like do what you said and write a first draft and then review it and then go back over and delete some stuff.
You should get one of these, I don't know if you've seen them, like waterproof shower notepads. You get a little pen and notepad and you can take notes in the shower. I got one thinking I was going to capture some bloody brilliant ideas, but that's not what happened. I just kind of forgot to use it, to be honest.
I do need that because sometimes I get out the shower and I'm like, oh, I forgot all the thoughts.
All right. The last kind of category of personal branding I wanted to jump into briefly is on the topic of getting involved with community. It's interesting that you host this nonprofit and you also participate in things like Twitter Spaces. That's a pretty broad experience, right, between analog and digital. But it can be super daunting, I think, for people to get involved. Do you have any advice? Maybe sometimes you're just kind of observing or lurking and you feel like maybe there's more to be done there.
I don't think there's anything wrong with observing and lurking. There are communities that I observe and lurk in because I feel like that's the bandwidth I have to contribute because I can't be involved and do everything. And then also like maybe I feel like I'm in the point of I just want to learn from what other people are thinking. So I don't think that's bad. But what's helped me in it not being as scary to meet new people is doing it virtually. With a virtual format, I can't see the person. If I'm feeling exhausted from socializing with people, I could always like respond later and then just go for it. Like it might be scary, but you never know like the connections that you're going to create with people. Just go for like saying hello to them. Even if it's just like liking someone's tweet, like if you're on Twitter or whatever, like social media profile, right? Like liking someone's tweet, that's interacting with them. Then they'll be like, oh, I've seen that face before. I've seen that name before. And they'll feel a little bit more familiarized with you. So take like little small steps. It doesn't have to be like every day you're responding to a million tweets and all that. But like just interact with people in the way that your social energy can handle it. That's why I think like you don't have to be. I just like being involved in community because it's just an easy way for me as an introvert to like learn from others without having to like always be hanging out and draining my energy.
What I take away from that is it's not so daunting, really. The community is more supportive than you might imagine. And when it comes to social media, it's friends, not followers. Try and foster real connections with people, and they'll probably take you places in group environments as well. I'm totally stealing this advice from someone. It was a guest of mine on the podcast who recently got a job as a developer, and they explained to me that one of their favorite ways to approach meetups was to bring a friend. Like they might not have a whole squad of learner developers, but they knew one person who was interested. And by going with a friend, you have someone to like fall back on a little bit if you need. And I will just happily say that I recently went to a meetup it wasn't around coding, it was around SaaS and startup funding and stuff. I thought it'd be interesting. It was near the office I work at. I'm quite introverted, so I was kind of like, maybe I'll go, maybe I won't go. But I was like, no, I need to make a commitment here, otherwise I definitely won't go. So I messaged a mate of mine and said, hey, I'm going to this event. Do you want to come? And then the combination of the like commitment plus, having someone to fall back on between conversations with different people. Yeah, it made it super easy, super fun. And just speaking as an introvert, I'm sure people listening, there might be various places on the spectrum of introversion and being extroverted. But as an introvert, I rarely ever regret it. Feels a bit daunting sometimes going into it, but on the way out, I never regret it.
Yeah, I love that. And wait, you just reminded me of something. So I haven't had to go to a in-person meetup in so long because Massachusetts, like where I live, kind of stopped having a lot of tech meetups once the pandemic happened. Like a lot of them haven't been revamped, or like they only have like maybe 2 or 3 people showing up. But I do agree with bringing a friend. That always did help. And then another thing that I did, which I don't know if this sounds weird, but I will like look at who's on the list of speakers and like who's showing up. And I'd be like, okay, my goal is to talk to this 1 or 2 people. And then like I would know I accomplished what I needed to.
I like that so much. Well, we're almost out of time, unfortunately, but I was hoping just in closing, we could get your advice for anybody who's starting their career as a developer, learning to code, or trying to get their first job. What are some of the most important things that helped you that our listeners might find interesting?
The first thing is it's okay to switch after a while. Like sometimes we look at the tech industry and we're like, which one do I start with? Do I start with data analysis, IT, software engineering, product management? I'm like, go for one of them, like focus and stick to that. And then once you get an experience of what that's like and see where your strengths and weaknesses are, then you can maybe try the next career. That's what I think, at least. Like figure out how you can take those transferable skills to something that will make you feel more fulfilled. You don't have to like stay in one thing forever. My other advice is like take your time. You don't have to like rush the entire process. I know a lot of times in coding and software engineering, everyone's like, oh, I learned to code in like 2 months and now I'm making $500K.
No.
That's not always realistic. And it is okay to let yourself slowly learn and go on that journey because it'll prepare you even more. Like you don't want to jump into like being a senior engineer because that's just so much pressure. It's okay to start small and then grow little by little. And then my last thought is save moments that you've accomplished something, any small win. That way, when you're having like a bad day or not feeling too positive about your work or the value that you're bringing, you can look back at those wins and be like, okay, you know what? This is just a bad day.
Oh, I like that so much, Rizel. What, like you could maybe email yourself or something, or keep a notepad document and just keep track of these things. That's a really cool idea to end on. Rizel Scarlett, thank you so much for joining me on the Scrimba podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
That was the Scrimba podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you made it this far, please consider subscribing. You will find the show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you think you'd be a great guest on the show, or you know somebody who would, go to podcast.scrimba.com. Click on Become a Guest, fill in the form, and we'll be in touch. The Scrimba podcast is hosted by Alex Booker and produced by me. I've been Jan, the producer. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, keep coding and enjoy your summer.